The blood-soaked auction flyer fluttered in the dusty street of Silver Creek, Colorado, as Josephine Zimmerman stumbled onto the wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her delicate skin. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild, lawless, and cruel to those without protection. Her honey-blonde hair hung in tangled strands around her face, partially concealing the bruise that bloomed across her left cheekbone like a terrible flower. "Next up, gentlemen," bellowed the auctioneer, a pot-bellied man with tobacco-stained teeth and eyes that held no compassion. "A fine filly from back east. Young, strong, can cook and clean. Might need some breaking in, but she'll serve a man well." Raucous laughter erupted from the crowd of miners, ranchers, and drifters who had gathered for the illegal human auction. Josephine kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. 3 weeks ago, she had been the daughter of a respected Boston merchant. Now, after her father's sudden death and her uncle's betrayal, she was being sold like livestock in a frontier town she'd never heard of until the stagecoach had deposited her here under false pretenses. Her uncle had arranged everything, eager to rid himself of a niece who stood to inherit what he considered rightfully his. $200, came a shout from the crowd. $250, countered another voice. Josephine shivered despite the summer heat. She had tried to escape twice already, earning herself the bruise and a reputation for being spirited. The auctioneer had warned her that another attempt would result in far worse punishment. $300, called a gruff voice. The crowd parted to reveal a man with a weather-beaten face and cold eyes. Magnus Thornton, the owner of the largest silver mine in the territory, and a man known for working his acquisitions to death in the darkness below ground. $500. The new voice cut through the crowd like a knife. A tall figure moved forward, the sunlight glinting off spurs that clinked softly against worn leather boots. As he approached the platform, Josephine saw a man unlike the others. His face was tanned by the sun but clean-shaven, his eyes a piercing blue beneath the brim of a dusty black Stetson. He wore a simple shirt, vest, and denims, with a gun belt slung low on his hips. "Well now, Owen Norton," the auctioneer said with a nervous laugh. "Didn't expect to see you taking an interest in our merchandise today." "She's not merchandise," Owen replied, his voice calm but carrying an edge that silenced the crowd. "She's a woman, and you're no better than the scum I scrape off my boots." The auctioneer's face flushed red. "Now see here, Norton, I said 500, Owen interrupted, climbing the steps to the platform. He stood directly before the auctioneer, his hand resting casually near his holstered Colt. "And I'm taking her with me now. This is a legal auction." The auctioneer protested, though his voice had lost its bluster. Owen's laugh was cold. "Legal? Selling human beings hasn't been legal in this country for 10 years. I wonder what the federal marshal in Denver would say about your operation here." A tense silence fell over the crowd. Josephine watched the standoff with her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't know this man, but anything seemed better than being sold to the mine owner whose hungry gaze still lingered on her. The auctioneer glanced nervously at the gathered men, some of whom had begun to drift away, suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. 500 it is, then," he muttered, extending his hand for payment. Owen counted out the bills and tossed them contemptuously at the auctioneer's feet. Then he turned to Josephine, his expression softening slightly. With a quick movement, he drew a knife from his belt and cut her bonds. "You're no one's property, miss," he said quietly for her ears alone. "Not his, not mine, not anyone's." Josephine rubbed her chafed wrists, staring at this stranger who had just spent a small fortune to free her. "Why?" she whispered. "Questions later," he replied, nodding toward the crowd that was beginning to mutter and shift restlessly. "Can you ride?" "Yes," she said, summoning her courage. Her father had insisted she learn, despite her mother's protests that it wasn't ladylike. Owen nodded once, then turned and guided her down the steps with a light touch on her elbow. The crowd parted before them, no one quite willing to challenge the tall cowboy, whose reputation apparently preceded him. Tethered to a hitching post outside the saloon was a magnificent chestnut stallion with a white blaze down its nose. Owen helped Josephine mount, then swung up behind her in one fluid motion. She stiffened at the proximity, but there was nothing improper in the way he held her, just the necessary closeness of two people sharing a saddle. "Hold on," he murmured, and then they were moving, the horse's powerful strides carrying them down the main street and out of Silver Creek at a gallop. As the town receded behind them, Josephine felt the tension begin to ebb from her body. The mountains loomed ahead, vast and indifferent to human suffering, while the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grassland. She had no idea where this stranger was taking her or what his true intentions might be, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, following a trail that wound its way up into the foothills. Finally, Owen slowed the horse to a walk and guided it toward a small stream that bubbled over rocks worn smooth by time and water. "We'll rest here," he said, dismounting and then helping her down. "You must be thirsty." Josephine nodded, suddenly aware of her parched throat. She knelt by the stream and cupped the cold, clear water in her hands, drinking deeply while Owen tended to his horse. When she had drunk her fill, she sat back on her heels and studied her rescuer. In the golden light of late afternoon, she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30, with fine lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against the sun rather than age. His movements were economical, practiced, and there was a quiet confidence about him that she found reassuring. "Thank you," she said at last. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Owen finished watering his horse before turning to her. "No need for repayment, Miss Zimmerman." "Josephine Zimmerman." "Miss Zimmerman," he nodded. "I'm Owen Norton. I have a ranch about 2 hours' ride from here. I can offer you shelter there tonight, and then tomorrow we can discuss your situation." "My situation," she repeated, a bitter smile touching her lips. "My situation is that I'm alone in a strange territory with nothing but the clothes on my back, Mr. Norton. My father died 3 weeks ago, and my uncle arranged to have me brought here under the pretense of meeting a family friend. Instead, I found myself." Her voice faltered. "Sold like a mare at auction," Owen finished grimly. "It's happening more often lately. Men who have struck out in the mines or lost their land turn to trading in human misery." "But you stopped it," Josephine said. "Why? You don't know me." Owen's gaze shifted to the distant horizon. "Let's just say I've seen what happens to people who get bought at those auctions. No one deserves that fate." He paused, then added more softly, "Especially not a lady like yourself who's clearly far from home." There was something in his tone, a hint of a deeper story, but Josephine was too exhausted to press further. The events of the day had drained her completely, and she swayed slightly on her feet. Owen noticed immediately. "We should get moving if we want to reach the ranch before dark," he said, offering his hand to help her up. "Can you manage a bit longer?" Josephine nodded, summoning her remaining strength. "I can manage." They rode on as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. The landscape changed gradually, the sparse grasslands giving way to stands of aspen and pine. The air grew cooler, scented with resin and wildflowers, and Josephine found herself relaxing against Owen's solid presence at her back. "Almost there," he said as they crested a ridge. Below them lay a valley, sheltered by mountains on three sides. A river meandered through it, silver in the fading light. Near the river stood a substantial log house with several outbuildings, corrals, and what looked like a small bunkhouse. Smoke rose from the chimney, a welcoming sight as dusk began to settle. "It's beautiful," Josephine murmured. "It's home," Owen replied simply, urging his horse down the slope. As they approached the ranch, a figure emerged from the barn, waving. It was an older man with a grizzled beard and a slight limp, who eyed Josephine with undisguised curiosity as Owen reined in the horse. "Even in, boss," the man said. "Wasn't expecting you back till tomorrow." "Change of plans, Hank," Owen replied, dismounting and then helping Josephine down. "This is Miss Zimmerman. She'll be staying with us for a while." Hank touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, welcome to Aspen Creek Ranch." "Thank you," Josephine said, attempting a smile despite her fatigue. "Hank, would you mind asking Mrs. Wilkins to prepare a room and maybe some hot water for our guest?" Owen asked, leading his horse toward the barn. "Already done," Hank replied with a wink. "Saw you coming down the ridge. Mrs. Wilkins has been in a flurry ever since, muttering about company standards and such." Owen's lips twitched in a suppressed smile. "Of course she has." He turned to Josephine. "Mrs. Wilkins is our housekeeper. She came out from Philadelphia 10 years ago as a mail-order bride, only to discover her intended was more interested in her cooking skills than companionship. When he passed on, I offered her a position here. She'll talk your ear off if you let her," Hank added good-naturedly. "But she's the best cook in 3 territories, and she keeps this place running smoother than a well-oiled colt." The thought of a hot meal, a bath, and a real bed nearly brought tears to Josephine's eyes. She had spent the past nights on hard stage-coach seats or in dirty roadhouses where she had barricaded the door with furniture. The front door of the house opened, spilling warm light into the growing darkness. A plump woman in her 50s stood silhouetted against it, hands on her ample hips. "Well, don't just stand there letting in the evening chill," she called. "Bring the poor girl inside, Mr. Norton, before she catches her death." Owen chuckled, the sound warming something deep inside Josephine. "Mrs. Wilkins," he said by way of explanation, offering Josephine his arm. "I'd best do as she says, or we'll both be in trouble." Josephine placed her hand on his arm, feeling the strength beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. As they walked toward the house, she found herself wondering at the strange turn her life had taken. This morning, she had awakened believing her life was over. Now, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, she felt the first stirring of something that might, with time and care, grow into hope. The interior of the ranch house was a revelation. Josephine had expected frontier roughness, but instead found comfort and even touches of elegance. The main room featured a massive stone fireplace where logs crackled cheerfully, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with bookshelves. Braided rugs softened the plank floors, and oil lamps cast a warm glow over sturdy but well-crafted furniture. "Miss Zimmerman needs food, a bath, and rest in that order," Owen told Mrs. Wilkins, who was already appraising Josephine with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "I can see that for myself. Thank you very much," the housekeeper retorted, taking Josephine's hand in her own. "Come along, dear. I've got stew simmering, and I'll have a bath drawn for you right after. You look like you've been through the wars." Josephine allowed herself to be led to a dining table set in a corner of the main room. Despite her exhaustion, her manners held. "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Wilkins." "I don't wish to be a bother," the older woman snorted. "Bother? In this house of men who track in dirt and talk of nothing but cattle and horses. My dear, having another woman to converse with is a gift from Providence." She bustled away toward what must be the kitchen, leaving Josephine with Owen. He hung his hat on a peg by the door and ran a hand through his hair, which was a rich brown with hints of gold where the sun had lightened it. Without the hat shadowing his features, his face appeared even more handsome, with strong, clean lines and those remarkable blue eyes that seemed to see right through pretense. "Please, sit," he said, pulling out a chair for her. Mrs. Wilkins wasn't exaggerating about her stew. "It's worth riding all day for." Josephine sat, arranging her rumpled skirts as best she could. "Your home is lovely, Mr. Norton. I confess it's not what I expected." A half-smile lifted one corner of his mouth. "And what did you expect, Miss Zimmerman?" "A dirt floor and buffalo hides for blankets," she blushed. "I didn't mean to imply no offense taken," he assured her, taking the seat across from her. "I know what Easterners think of us out here, but some of us appreciate civilization's finer points, even in the wilderness." He gestured toward the bookshelves. "Literature, for instance. Music." He nodded toward a piano in the corner that she hadn't noticed. "Even good china, thanks to Mrs. Wilkins." As if summoned by her name, the housekeeper reappeared with a tray bearing 2 steaming bowls and a basket of bread that smelled heavenly. "Eat while it's hot," she instructed, setting the food before them. "I've sent Hank to bring in water for your bath, Miss Zimmerman. I've laid out some things in the guest room that might fit. You belong to my niece who visited last summer. Skinny little thing like yourself." "That's very kind," Josephine began, but Mrs. Wilkins waved away her thanks. "Nonsense. Just doing what's proper. Now eat, both of you. I'll be back with coffee." Left alone again with Owen, Josephine picked up her spoon, suddenly aware of her ravenous hunger. The stew was indeed delicious, rich with tender beef, vegetables, and herbs. For several minutes they ate in companionable silence. "You must have questions," Owen said finally, breaking a piece of bread. Josephine nodded, setting down her spoon. "Many. But perhaps the most pressing is what happens next. I appreciate your rescue and hospitality, Mr. Norton, but I can't impose on you indefinitely. I need to find a way to support myself." Owen studied her for a moment. "Do you have any family or friends you could go to?" "No," she said, the word carrying the weight of her isolation. "My mother died when I was 12. My father was my only family except for the uncle who—" She couldn't finish. "Who sold you?" Owen said flatly, anger flashing in his eyes before he controlled it. "I'm sorry, truly." "Thank you," she whispered. "I do have some education. I can read and write well. I speak French and I'm proficient in mathematics. My father believed women should be educated despite society's views. Perhaps I could find work as a teacher or a clerk." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "Silver Creek has no proper school yet, but Aspen is growing quickly. It's about a day's ride from here. They might need teachers." He hesitated, then added, "But there's no rush for you to decide anything. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need to sort things out." Josephine was touched by his generosity but wary. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to create any impropriety." A single woman staying at a bachelor's ranch. To her surprise, Owen laughed. "Miss Zimmerman, this may be the frontier, but we're not completely without propriety. Mrs. Wilkins lives here full-time as housekeeper and chaperone. Hank and 2 other ranch hands stay in the bunkhouse. You'll find your reputation quite safe at Aspen Creek." She felt herself relax slightly. "I see, thank you. In that case, I would be grateful for a few days to recover and consider my options." "Consider it settled then," Owen said, pushing back from the table as Mrs. Wilkins returned with a coffee pot and cups. "And now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on a few things in the barn. Mrs. Wilkins will see to your comfort." Josephine watched him go, struck by the contradictions in the man. He had the hard exterior of a frontiersman but spoke with the education of a gentleman. He had rescued her without hesitation, yet seemed almost shy in her presence now. Above all, he had shown her kindness when she needed it most, asking nothing in return. "He's a good man, that one, Mrs. Wilkins said, following Josephine's gaze. "Too good for his own well-being sometimes." "How do you mean?" Josephine asked, accepting a cup of the strong, black coffee. The housekeeper sat down with her own cup, clearly ready for conversation. "Mr. Norton didn't just happen to be at that auction today, you know. He goes whenever he hears of one, and he's not the only one. There's a network of decent folks trying to put a stop to the trade. Some buy people to free them, like he did with you. Others work to get the law involved, though that's slow going in these parts." Josephine absorbed this information, her estimation of Owen rising even higher. "Has he done this before, then? Rescued others?" Mrs. Wilkins nodded. "3 times that I know of. A Chinese man who now runs a laundry in Aspen, a Negro fellow who works as a blacksmith 2 towns over, and a young Mexican woman who's teaching at a mission school down south." She sipped her coffee. "Mr. Norton helped each of them get established with what they needed: money, supplies, introductions to the right people." "That's extraordinary," Josephine murmured. "What drives a man to take such risks for strangers?" Something passed across Mrs. Wilkins' face, a shadow of old sorrow. "That's his story to tell if he chooses," she said finally. "Now your bath should be ready. Let's get you cleaned up and into a proper bed. You look dead on your feet, my dear." The bath was heaven. In a small room off the kitchen, Mrs. Wilkins had prepared a copper tub filled with steaming water and scented with lavender. For the first time in weeks, Josephine was able to wash thoroughly, scrubbing away the dirt and fear of her ordeal. The borrowed nightgown and robe that awaited her were simple but clean, and after plaiting her damp hair, she felt almost human again. The guest room continued the theme of rustic comfort. A bed with a patchwork quilt dominated the space, flanked by a small bedside table with an oil lamp. A braided rug covered most of the plank floor, and curtains of faded blue cotton framed the window that looked out toward the mountains. Despite her exhaustion, Josephine found sleep elusive. She lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night: the distant lowing of cattle, the soft hooting of an owl, the creak of the house settling. Her mind whirled with questions about her future, and with thoughts of the enigmatic Owen Norton, whose kindness had saved her from a fate she dared not contemplate too closely. Eventually, the gentle rhythm of rain on the roof lulled her into slumber, deep and dreamless for the first time in weeks. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the curtains and the aroma of coffee and baking bread. Josephine dressed in the simple clothes. Mrs. Wilkins had provided a skirt of sturdy brown cotton and a cream-colored blouse with tiny blue flowers embroidered at the collar. They were plain but clean and fit well enough with the help of a few pins. When she emerged from her room, she found the main living area empty, but voices drifted from the kitchen. Following the sound, she discovered Mrs. Wilkins at the stove and Owen seated at a wooden table, a cup of coffee in hand. He rose when she entered, an automatic gesture of courtesy that reminded her again of his contradictory nature. "Good morning, Miss Zimmerman," he said. "I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you," she replied, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Wilkins immediately offered. The rain was soothing. "It was needed," Owen said, resuming his seat as Josephine took the chair across from him. "The pastures have been dry lately." "Breakfast will be ready in a moment, Mrs. Wilkins announced, turning back to her stove where something sizzled promisingly. Owen cleared his throat. "I was just telling Mrs. Wilkins that I need to ride into Aspen today on business. I thought perhaps you might like to accompany me." It would give you a chance to see the town and possibly inquire about opportunities there. Josephine's heart leapt at the prospect of action, of taking a step toward establishing her new life, whatever form it might take. I would like that very much, thank you. His smile transformed his face, softening the lines around his eyes. Good. We'll leave after breakfast if that suits you. Mrs. Wilkins set plates before them, eggs, bacon, and fresh bread with butter and honey from the ranch's own hives. Eat up, she instructed. It's a long ride to town. As they ate, Owen told Josephine about Aspen. It started as a mining town about 10 years ago, but it's growing into something more substantial now. There's a hotel, several stores, a bank, a doctor who actually knows what he's doing, and even a small theater where traveling shows perform sometimes. It sounds quite civilized, Josephine remarked. Parts of it are, Owen agreed. Other parts are still rough around the edges. The silver mines bring in all sorts honest workers alongside gamblers, swindlers, and worse. But the town council is working to establish more permanent institutions. A proper school would be one of them. You think they might need a teacher? Josephine asked, hope coloring her voice. It's worth asking, Owen said. I know several council members. I can make introductions. After breakfast, Mrs. Wilkins packed a small basket with sandwiches and apple turnovers for their journey. While Owen saddled the horses, his chestnut stallion and a gentle gray mare for Josephine, the housekeeper pressed a package into Josephine's hands. A few more things you might need, she said kindly. Nothing fancy, just practical items, and a hat you'll burn to a crisp in this sun without one. Josephine was touched by the woman's thoughtfulness. I don't know how to thank you. No need, dear. Just come back in one piece. Mr. Norton has enough to worry about without adding your welfare to his list. The ride to Aspen took most of the morning. At first, Josephine was nervous about handling the mare, but the horse proved to be well-trained and responsive. As her confidence grew, she began to enjoy the journey, taking in the spectacular scenery. The trail wound through meadows dotted with wildflowers, across streams that sparkled in the sunlight, and through stands of aspens whose leaves trembled in the slightest breeze. Owen proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history and wildlife. He spoke of the native Ute people who had hunted these mountains for generations before being pushed out by white settlers, of the early trappers and prospectors who had first ventured into this wilderness, and of his own arrival 10 years earlier. I came out from Pennsylvania after the war, he told her. Couldn't settle back into city life after what I'd seen. Needed open spaces and fresh air. You fought in the Civil War? Josephine asked, realizing how little she knew about this man. Owen nodded, his expression growing distant. Union cavalry. 4 long years. Something in his tone told her not to press for details. Instead, she asked about his ranch. How did you come to settle here specifically? His face lightened. Pure luck. I was working as a trail guide for a group of investors looking at mining claims. We camped in that valley one night and I couldn't get it out of my head. When the job ended, I went back and found that the land wasn't claimed yet. Filed my papers, built a cabin, and started with just 10 head of cattle. Been building it up ever since. It's a beautiful place, Josephine said sincerely. You've accomplished a great deal. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I've been fortunate. Had good people helping me like Hank and Mrs. Wilkins, and I was in the right place at the right time for some opportunities. They crested a ridge, and suddenly the town of Aspen lay before them in a broad valley. The buildings clustered along a main street that followed the course of a river. Beyond the town, the mountains rose dramatically, their peaks still bearing patches of snow despite the summer heat. It's beautiful, Josephine breathed. "It is at that," Owen agreed, "though it gets mighty cold in winter. The snow can pile up 6 feet deep in town, more in the passes." They rode down into Aspen, and Josephine was struck by the contrast between this growing town and the roughness of Silver Creek. Here, many of the buildings were constructed of brick or cut stone rather than rough lumber. The streets were wider, with wooden sidewalks along the main thoroughfare. People moved with purpose, rather than the aimless loitering she had observed in Silver Creek. Owen led the way to a livery stable where they left their horses. "I need to see the banker first," he explained as they walked toward the main street. "After that, we can visit the town hall and inquire about teaching positions." The First Bank of Aspen occupied a substantial building on the corner of the main street. Inside, it was cool and quiet, with a polished counter separating customers from tellers who worked behind iron bars. Owen was greeted warmly by the bank manager, a portly man named Harrison, who ushered them into his private office. Josephine sat quietly as the men discussed business loans for new equipment, the price of beef, the cost of expanding Owen's herd. She was impressed by Owen's knowledge and the respect with which the banker treated him. Clearly, he was a man of substance in this community. When their business was concluded, Owen introduced her. "This is Miss Josephine Zimmerman, recently arrived from Boston. She's considering settling in the area, possibly as a teacher if an opportunity arises." Harrison's eyes lit up. "A teacher? From Boston? My dear Miss Zimmerman, you may be the answer to our prayers. The town council just voted last month to establish a proper school, but we've been at a loss for a qualified instructor. Most of our educated women are already married with families of their own." Josephine's heart quickened. "I have experience tutoring, sir, though I've never taught in a formal school setting. I'm well versed in literature, mathematics, history, and French. Better qualified than anyone else we're likely to find," Harrison said enthusiastically. "Would you consider meeting with the school committee this afternoon? They're gathering at the town hall at 3 o'clock. Owen glanced at Josephine. "We can adjust our schedule if you'd like to attend." "Yes, please," she said, barely containing her excitement. "I would very much like to meet with them." With the meeting arranged, Owen and Josephine left the bank and continued down the main street. Aspen was bustling with activity, miners coming off shift, merchants hawking their wares, women shopping, and children darting between pedestrians in improvised games. They stopped for lunch at a small cafe that offered simple but well-prepared food. As they ate, Owen pointed out various establishments and explained their significance in the town's social structure. The Grand Hotel catered to wealthy investors. The Silver Dollar Saloon was respectable enough in the front room, but offered gambling and other diversions in the back. The general store was owned by a family from New York who had fair prices and didn't water their whiskey. "And that building there," he said, indicating a 2-story structure with large windows, "is where they're planning to house the school. It was originally built as offices for a mining company that went bust last year. The town bought it at auction." Josephine studied the building, trying to envision herself teaching there. After so much uncertainty, the possibility of having a purpose, a role in this community, filled her with hope. After lunch, Owen had more errands to run, visiting the saddle maker for repairs, purchasing supplies at the general store, and meeting briefly with a cattle buyer to discuss future sales. Josephine accompanied him, fascinated by this glimpse into the workings of Western commerce. It was so different from her father's importing business in Boston. Yet she recognized the same principles of negotiation, relationship building, and careful accounting. At 2:45, they made their way to the town hall, a substantial building that also housed the sheriff's office and courtroom. The school committee was already gathering in a meeting room, 3 men and 2 women, all with the serious air of people engaged in important civic work. Owen made the introductions, and Josephine found herself answering questions about her education, her teaching philosophy, and her willingness to adapt to frontier conditions. The school term would run from September through May, explained Mrs. Eleanor Peterson, the committee chair and wife of Aspen's most prominent physician. We anticipate perhaps 20 to 30 students of various ages and abilities. Some have had no formal education at all, while others have been taught by their parents. Can you manage such diversity, Miss Zimmerman? I believe so, Josephine replied confidently. I would assess each child's level and group them accordingly, providing appropriate instruction for each group while keeping all engaged. The questioning continued for nearly an hour. Through it all, Owen remained quietly supportive, occasionally adding a comment that highlighted Josephine's qualifications or character. His presence gave her strength, and she found herself speaking with more assurance than she had felt in weeks. Finally, Mrs. Peterson consulted briefly with the other committee members before turning back to Josephine with a smile. Well, Miss Zimmerman, unless someone more qualified suddenly appears, which seems highly unlikely, I believe we would like to offer you the position of schoolteacher for Aspen. The salary is $40 per month, with accommodations provided in rooms above the school. We would need you to start by September 1st to prepare the schoolroom and develop your curriculum. Josephine could hardly believe her ears. In the span of a single day, she had gone from being a woman with no prospects to having a respectable position, a salary, and a place to live. I would be honored to accept, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning within her. There were papers to sign and details to discuss, but by 4:30, it was official. Josephine Zimmerman was Aspen's new schoolteacher. As they left the town hall, she found herself blinking back tears of relief and gratitude. Congratulations, Miss Zimmerman, Owen said softly as they walked back toward the livery stable. I believe you've impressed them all. I couldn't have done it without your support, she replied. Your introduction made all the difference. He shook his head. I only opened the door. You walked through it on your own merits. There was unmistakable pride in his voice, and something else, a warmth that made her heart beat faster. They collected their horses and began the journey back to the ranch as the afternoon light softened toward evening. Josephine was quiet, processing all that had happened. Her future, which had seemed so bleak just days ago, now held promise. She had a purpose, a place, a way to support herself honorably. But as the miles passed beneath their horses' hooves, a new realization began to form. In less than 2 months, she would be leaving Aspen Creek Ranch for her new position in town. The thought brought an unexpected pang of regret. In just one day, she had grown comfortable in Owen's presence, appreciative of his quiet strength and integrity. The prospect of no longer seeing him daily left her feeling strangely bereft. You're very quiet, Owen observed as they forded a shallow stream, having second thoughts about the teaching position. Not at all, she assured him. It's more than I could have hoped for. I was just thinking. She hesitated, unsure how to express her conflicted feelings. Yes, he prompted when she didn't continue. I was thinking that I'll miss the ranch when I move to town, she admitted. Everyone has been so kind, it already feels like. She stopped, embarrassed by what she had been about to say. Like home, Owen finished gently. She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. You'll always be welcome at Aspen Creek, he said, his voice low and sincere. Whenever you wish to visit, and I come into town regularly for supplies and business. Thank you, she murmured. That means a great deal to me. They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence as the sun sank toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. By the time they reached the ranch, stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. Mrs. Wilkins was waiting with a hot meal and eager questions about their day in town. Over dinner, Josephine recounted the meeting with the school committee and her unexpected appointment as teacher. The housekeeper was delighted but also clearly disappointed that Josephine would be leaving the ranch. "Though I suppose it's for the best," she said with a significant glance at Owen that Josephine couldn't interpret. "A young woman needs her independence and a proper place in society." That night, lying in bed, Josephine reflected on the swift changes in her circumstances. From pampered daughter to auctioned captive to rescued woman to independent teacher, all in the space of a month. It was dizzying, and yet she felt stronger for having survived it. Tomorrow, she would ask Owen about writing to the authorities in Boston regarding her uncle's crimes. She might have lost her old life, but justice could still be served. With that resolve, she drifted into sleep, dreaming of a classroom filled with eager children and of a tall cowboy watching her from the doorway, blue eyes warm with pride. The following days established a pleasant routine. Josephine helped Mrs. Wilkins with household tasks in the mornings, learning frontier skills like bread making and preserving that would serve her well in her independent life. In the afternoons, she often sat on the porch with books borrowed from Owen's surprisingly extensive library, preparing lesson plans for her future students. Owen himself was busy with ranch work, mending fences, tending to a sick calf, training a young horse. She saw him at meals and occasionally in the evenings when he would join her on the porch as the day cooled into night. Their conversations ranged widely, from literature to politics to the challenges of Western development. Josephine found him to be thoughtful and well-informed, with firmly held principles but an open mind. A week after their trip to Aspen, Owen invited her to ride out with him to see more of the ranch. It was a glorious summer day, the sky an impossible blue, the air scented with pine and sage. They rode at an easy pace, Josephine now comfortable on the gray mare, which she had learned was named Daisy. Owen showed her the extent of his land, nearly 2,000 acres of valleys, ridges, and meadows where his cattle grazed. He pointed out the creek that gave the ranch its name, explaining how it never ran dry even in the worst droughts, making his land particularly valuable. They stopped to rest in a high meadow dotted with wildflowers. Owen spread a blanket in the shade of a lone pine, and they shared the lunch Mrs. Wilkins had packed for them. As they ate, Josephine gathered her courage to broach a subject that had been on her mind. "Mr. Norton," she began hesitantly, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." He looked up from the apple he was slicing, his knife pausing mid-cut. "You've been living under my roof for a week now, Miss Zimmerman. I think you might call me Owen," she smiled. "Only if you'll call me Josephine." "Agreed. Josephine." The way he said her name, with a slight softening of his tone, sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Owen," she said, testing the intimacy of it. "Mrs. Wilkins mentioned that you've helped others like me, people who were being sold illegally." His expression grew guarded. "She did she?" She didn't share details, Josephine hastened to add. "Just that it wasn't your first time intervening at an auction. I've been wondering, why do you take such risks for strangers?" Owen was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. "My younger sister, Olivia, disappeared during the war. I was away fighting, and our parents had died the year before. She was staying with relatives in Richmond. When the city fell to Union forces, there was chaos. Somehow she got separated from our aunt and uncle during the evacuation." He paused, absently turning the knife in his hands. After I was mustered out, I spent nearly 2 years searching for her. Eventually, I learned that she had been taken by men who trafficked in young women, selling them to brothels or as wives to men in remote areas. His jaw tightened. I traced her as far as St. Louis, but then the trail went cold. She would be 29 now if she's still alive. "Oh, Owen," Josephine whispered, her heart aching for him. "I'm so sorry." "I never stopped looking," he continued. "Even after I settled here, I would make trips to cities where I heard rumors of auction rings operating. I keep hoping that somehow I'll find her, or at least learn what happened to her." He met Josephine's gaze directly. "And along the way, if I can keep other women from suffering a similar fate, it seems the least I can do." Impulsively, Josephine reached out and covered his hand with hers. "What you're doing is remarkable. Most men would have given up the search years ago, or at least stopped taking personal risks for others." Owen looked down at their hands, then gently turned his palm upward to clasp her fingers. "I couldn't live with myself if I did less, and every person I help feels like." He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "Like honoring your sister's memory," Josephine finished softly, "like keeping faith with her." "Yes." The single word was filled with emotion. "Exactly that." They sat in silence for a moment, hands still joined, the connection between them deepening with this shared understanding. Finally, Owen cleared his throat and gently withdrew his hand. "We should start back soon," he said. "There's a storm building over the mountains." Josephine looked up and saw that he was right. Dark clouds were gathering to the west, their undersides tinged with the ominous gray-green that signaled thunderstorms. "Will we make it back in time?" "If we ride directly," he said, already packing away their lunch things. "The storms can move quickly through these valleys." They mounted and set off at a faster pace than before, Josephine following Owen's lead as he chose a more direct route back to the ranch. The wind picked up, bending the tall grasses and bringing with it the sharp smell of rain. In the distance, lightning flickered within the clouds, followed seconds later by the low rumble of thunder. The first fat drops began to fall when the ranch buildings came into view. By the time they reached the barn, the rain was coming down in earnest, driven by gusts of wind that threatened to tear off Josephine's hat. They dismounted quickly, leading the horses into the shelter of the barn just as a brilliant flash of lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. "That was close," Owen said, shaking water from his hat. "Let's get these horses taken care of, and then make a run for the house." Together they removed the saddles and bridles, rubbed the horses down with old blankets, and made sure they had fresh water and hay. The familiar tasks calmed Josephine, who had never been comfortable with thunderstorms. Back east, she would have hidden in her bedroom with a book, trying to ignore the tumult outside. "Ready?" Owen asked when they had finished. The storm was directly overhead now, the rain drumming on the barn's roof so loudly they had to raise their voices to be heard. Josephine nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. She had left her jacket in the house that morning, and her thin blouse offered little protection against the chill that had come with the storm. Owen noticed her shivering and shrugged out of his canvas coat. "Here," he said, draping it around her shoulders. It was warm from his body and carried his scent leather, pine, and something indefinably masculine. "Thank you," she said, pulling it closer around her. "But now you'll be cold," he smiled. "I'm used to it, ready to run." On his count of 3, they dashed from the barn toward the house, rain pelting them mercilessly. The yard had turned to mud that sucked at their boots, slowing their progress. Halfway to the house, Josephine's foot slipped, and she would have fallen if Owen hadn't caught her arm, steadying her. "Careful," he said, his voice close to her ear. Without releasing her, he guided her the rest of the way, his hand firm at her elbow. They burst through the front door, breathless and dripping, to find Mrs. Wilkins waiting with towels. "Land sakes, you two look like drowned rats," she exclaimed, handing each of them a towel. "Get dried off before you catch your death. There's hot coffee in the kitchen." Josephine patted her face and hair with the towel, acutely aware of Owen doing the same beside her. His hair, darkened by the rain, curled slightly at the ends, giving him a boyish appearance that contrasted with the strength of his features. Droplets of water clung to his eyelashes and tracked down his cheeks like tears. "You should change into dry clothes," he told her, his voice rougher than usual. "I'll do the same." She nodded, suddenly shy in the face of the intensity in his gaze. "Thank you for today," she said softly, "for sharing your story with me, and for saving me from the mud." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "My pleasure, Josephine." The way he said her name sent warmth spreading through her despite her damp clothes. She hurried to her room, Owen's coat still around her shoulders, her heart beating a rhythm that had nothing to do with their dash through the rain. That evening, after dinner had been cleared away, Owen surprised Josephine by inviting her to join him in the parlor. "I thought you might enjoy some music," he said, gesturing toward the piano. "It's been too long since this old thing was played properly." "Do you play?" she asked, curious. He shook his head. "No, but I believe you mentioned that you do, unless I'm mistaken." Josephine smiled, touched that he had remembered such a detail from their early conversations. "I do play, though I'm out of practice. Are you sure you wouldn't mind?" "I'd consider it a gift," he said sincerely. The piano was an upright model, not as grand as the one she had played in Boston, but well maintained. She ran her fingers over the keys, playing a few scales to familiarize herself with its touch. Then, drawing on memory, she began to play a Chopin nocturne, one of her father's favorites. The music filled the room, softening the sound of rain still falling steadily outside. Josephine lost herself in the familiar patterns, her fingers remembering what her mind had begun to forget during the weeks of hardship. When the piece ended, she looked up to find Owen watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you," she murmured, suddenly self-conscious. "My mother insisted on lessons from the time I was 6. She said it was an essential accomplishment for a young lady." "Your mother was wise," Owen said. "Though I suspect you would have sought out music even without her encouragement. You play with feeling, not just technique." Josephine was surprised by his insight. "You're right. I always loved it, even when I resented practicing scales for hours." She hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to hear something else?" "Very much." She played for nearly an hour Beethoven, Mozart, and simpler folk tunes that Owen recognized and sometimes hummed along with. When she finally stopped, her fingers tired but her spirit rejuvenated, she found Mrs. Wilkins had joined them, sitting quietly in a corner with her mending. "That was a treat, my dear," the housekeeper said, wiping a suspicious moisture from her eye. "This house has needed music. Too quiet by half, especially in winter." "I agree," Owen said. "We'll have to make this a regular occurrence while Josephine is with us." There was a hint of regret in his voice as he added, "before she leaves for her teaching position." Josephine felt the same regret. The weeks stretched before her 6, perhaps 7 before she needed to move to town. It seemed both too long and not nearly long enough. Later, as she prepared for bed, Josephine found herself humming one of the pieces she had played. The day had been full of revelations and emotions. Owen's story about his sister, the storm, the shared music. She felt closer to him now, drawn by more than gratitude for his rescue or admiration for his principles. There was something deeper growing between them, something that both thrilled and frightened her. As she drifted toward sleep, she wondered if he felt it too, this connection that seemed to strengthen with each passing day. And if he did, what would become of it when she left for Aspen? The days that followed fell into a pleasant pattern. Mornings were spent helping Mrs. Wilkins with household tasks or working on plans for her classroom. Afternoons often included rides around the ranch with Owen or quiet reading on the porch. Evenings brought dinner conversations, music, and sometimes card games that included Hank and the other ranch hands. 2 weeks after Josephine's arrival at Aspen Creek, Owen announced that he needed to drive cattle to a buyer in a town some 20 miles distant. "I'll be gone for 3 days," he told her over breakfast. "Hank will be here if you need anything, and of course, Mrs. Wilkins." Josephine was surprised by how much the prospect of his absence troubled her. In such a short time, his presence had become essential to her happiness, his conversation and companionship the highlights of her days. "I hope your journey goes well," she said, trying to mask her disappointment. "Will it be a difficult drive?" "Not too bad," he replied. "We've had good weather, so the trails should be passable. And the cattle are used to moving. We rotate pastures regularly." He left shortly after breakfast, leading 4 ranch hands and a herd of 50 cattle. Josephine stood on the porch and watched until they disappeared over a ridge, the dust of their passage hanging in the still morning air. With Owen gone, the ranch seemed strangely empty despite Mrs. Wilkins' cheerful presence and Hank's occasional visits to check that all was well. Josephine threw herself into preparing for her teaching position, writing to contacts in Boston for curriculum suggestions, and even beginning to sketch out lessons. On the second day of Owen's absence, a visitor arrived, Dr. Peterson from Aspen, husband of the school committee chairwoman. He had been called to a nearby homestead to treat a broken arm and stopped at the ranch on his way back to town. "Mrs. Peterson asked me to bring you these," he explained, handing Josephine a package wrapped in brown paper. "Some books for your classroom and a letter with details about your accommodations in town." "How kind," Josephine said, inviting him in for coffee. "Please thank her for me." Dr. Peterson accepted the coffee and spent a pleasant half-hour chatting about Aspen and his wife's plans for the school. "She's quite taken with you, you know," he told Josephine. "Says you're exactly what our community needs, cultured but not condescending, educated but practical." Josephine blushed at the praise. "I only hope I can live up to her expectations." "You will," he assured her. "And if I may say so, it's fortunate that Norton found you when he did. Those auctions." He shook his head in disgust. "Barbaric business. We've been trying to get the territorial governor to crack down on them, but progress is slow. Too many powerful men profit from the trade." "Owen mentioned that he's helped others in my situation," Josephine said carefully. Dr. Peterson nodded. "He's made it something of a personal mission. Started about 5 years ago after he tracked down a man who'd bought a young woman at auction and was mistreating her badly. Norton confronted him, and the story goes that he gave the man a choice: release the woman or face the consequences." The doctor chuckled. "The fellow chose wisely. Norton may be a civilized man in many ways, but he was a cavalry officer during the war, and he hasn't forgotten how to fight when necessary." This glimpse of a different side of Owen, the warrior, rather than the gentle rancher, intrigued Josephine. "What happened to the woman?" she asked. "Norton brought her to us. My wife helped her find a position as a companion to an elderly lady in Denver. Last we heard, she was doing well." Dr. Peterson drained his cup and stood. "I should be getting back to town. My wife will be expecting me for supper, and she does not appreciate tardiness." After the doctor left, Josephine unwrapped the package he had delivered. Inside were several textbooks, a teacher's manual, and a letter from Mrs. Peterson detailing the arrangements for Josephine's room above the school, a private entrance, simple furnishings, and the offer of meals with various families in the community until she was settled. It was all very practical and thoughtful, yet Josephine found herself unable to summon much enthusiasm. The prospect of leaving Aspen Creek Ranch, of no longer seeing Owen daily, weighed on her more heavily than she cared to admit. That evening, she played the piano for nearly 2 hours, pouring her confused emotions into the music. Mrs. Wilkins listened for a while, then tactfully withdrew, sensing perhaps that Josephine needed the solitude to sort through her feelings. When she finally went to bed, Josephine lay awake for a long time, watching moonlight create patterns on her ceiling and trying to understand the turmoil in her heart. Was it merely gratitude she felt toward Owen, dependency born of her rescue? Or was it something deeper, something that had grown naturally from their shared conversations, their common values, their mutual respect? The answer came to her with startling clarity just as she was drifting toward sleep. She was falling in love with Owen Norton. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. What if he did not share her feelings? What if he saw her only as someone he had rescued, a temporary guest in his home, a friend at most? And even if he did care for her, would he act on it, given her imminent departure for Aspen? With these questions circling in her mind, Josephine finally succumbed to sleep, only to dream of Owen riding away from her, always just beyond her reach. The third day of Owen's absence dawned clear and hot, the kind of summer day that seemed to stretch endlessly. Josephine rose early, helped Mrs. Wilkins prepare breakfast for the remaining ranch hands, then retreated to the porch with her books and papers. By mid-afternoon, restlessness drove her to saddle Daisy for a short ride. She stayed within sight of the ranch buildings, mindful of Owen's warnings about getting lost in the vast landscape. The rhythm of the horse's gait and the beauty of the surroundings gradually soothed her anxious mind, and she was in better spirits when she returned an hour later. She had just finished brushing Daisy and was closing the barn door when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw a group of riders coming down the trail from the north. Owen and his men, returning from their cattle drive. Her heart leapt at the sight of him, tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the sun. She remained by the barn, watching as they drew closer. Owen spotted her and raised a hand in greeting, then said something to his men before spurring his horse ahead. He reined in a few yards from where she stood, dust swirling around him. For a moment they simply looked at each other, and Josephine was struck by how right it felt to have him back, how the ranch seemed to come alive with his presence. "Welcome home," she said softly. He dismounted in one fluid movement and stepped toward her, leading his horse. "Thank you. It's good to be back." His eyes searched her face as if looking for changes in his absence. "Everything all right here?" "Yes, fine. Mrs. Wilkins has kept me well fed and busy with household lessons. And Dr. Peterson stopped by yesterday with materials from Mrs. Peterson for my teaching position." Something flickered in Owen's expression at the mention of her future job, regret, perhaps, or resignation. "Good. You'll be well prepared then." "I hope so." An awkward silence fell between them, unusual in their normally easy conversation. Josephine searched for something to say. "Was your trip successful?" "Very. Got a good price for the cattle." He glanced over his shoulder at his men who were approaching with their own mounts. "I should get this fellow settled and cleaned up. I'm sure Mrs. Wilkins has supper nearly ready." "Of course." Josephine stepped back, oddly disappointed by the brief exchange. "I'll see you at the house." He nodded and led his horse into the barn. Josephine walked slowly back to the house, wondering at the strange distance she had sensed in Owen. Was he tired from the journey, Or had she imagined the warmth between them before he left, constructing a connection that existed only in her own heart? Supper that evening was a lively affair, with the ranch hands joining the household to celebrate the successful cattle drive. Owen, freshly bathed and changed into clean clothes, sat at the head of the table, responding to the men's jokes and stories, but quieter than usual. Several times, Josephine caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. After the meal, the men drifted outside to smoke and continue their conversations. Mrs. Wilkins shooed Josephine away when she tried to help with the dishes. "You go on out to the porch," the housekeeper said. "Enjoy the evening. I can manage here." The porch was empty when Josephine stepped outside. The sun had set, but the western sky still glowed with bands of amber and rose. She sat in one of the wooden rocking chairs, listening to the distant laughter of the ranch hands and the nearer song of crickets beginning their nightly chorus. She had been sitting there perhaps 10 minutes when the screen door creaked open and Owen stepped out. He hesitated when he saw her, then came to join her, settling into the neighboring rocker. "Beautiful evening," he said after a moment. "Yes, it is." Josephine glanced sideways at him. In the fading light, his profile was strong and clean, his expression thoughtful. "Owen," she began hesitantly, "is something wrong? You seem distant." He was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. "I've been thinking a lot about you, about your position in Aspen." Her heart quickened. "What about it?" "It's a good opportunity for you," he said carefully. "Independence, respect, a chance to build a new life on your own terms." "Yes, it is," she agreed, waiting for him to continue. "While I was away, I realized that." He stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "I've grown very fond of having you here, Josephine. More than fond, if I'm honest. And I find myself wishing you weren't leaving so soon." Hope blossomed in her chest. "I've enjoyed being here too," she said softly. "More than I can say." Owen turned to face her directly, his eyes serious in the gathering dusk. "What I'm trying to say, not very well, is that I care for you, deeply. In a way I didn't expect and certainly didn't plan for." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "But I don't want to stand in the way of your independence. You've had your freedom taken from you once already. I won't be another man who tries to control your life." Josephine's throat tightened with emotion. "Owen," she said gently, "caring for someone isn't the same as controlling them. Quite the opposite, I think. True caring means wanting what's best for the other person, even if it's difficult." "And what's best for you is the teaching position," he said, a statement rather than a question. She considered this, truly considered it for the first time. The teaching position represented security, independence, a role in the community. But it also meant leaving Aspen Creek, leaving Owen. Was that really what she wanted? "I don't know," she admitted. "A month ago I would have said yes without hesitation, but now—" She met his gaze steadily. "Now I find myself reluctant to leave here, to leave you." Something kindled in his eyes, hope, mixed with caution. "Josephine, I don't want to rush you. You've been through a terrible ordeal and you're still adjusting to a new life. Your feelings might change once you've had more time to consider all your options." "My feelings for you won't change," she said with quiet conviction. "They've grown stronger every day since you rescued me. At first, I thought it was just gratitude, but it's more than that. It's respect for your principles, admiration for your kindness, enjoyment of your company." She took a deep breath. "It's love, Owen. I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. For a moment, Owen remained perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then, slowly, he reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand in his. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. God help me, I tried not to. I told myself it was wrong to have these feelings for someone I'd rescued, someone who might feel obligated to me, but I couldn't stop them from growing. Josephine turned her hand in his, intertwining their fingers. I don't feel obligated, she assured him. Grateful, yes, but not obligated. What I feel for you has nothing to do with duty and everything to do with who you are. The warmth of his smile in the gathering darkness was like sunrise. So where does this leave us? You have a position waiting in Aspen, a chance for independence that you deserve. And I still want that, she said thoughtfully. I want to teach to have purpose, but perhaps there's a way to have both my independence and us. Owen's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Aspen isn't far from here, she said, ideas forming as she spoke. I could teach during the week and perhaps visit on weekends, or you could visit me in town. She hesitated, then added more boldly, and if in time we find that our feelings remain as strong as they are now, perhaps we might consider a more permanent arrangement. Marriage, Owen said, the word carrying weight and promise. Yes, she whispered, if that's what you would want. It's what I want more than anything, he said fervently. But I need to know that you're choosing it freely, not out of necessity or gratitude. Then give me time, Josephine suggested. Let me take the teaching position as planned. Let me establish myself there, prove to myself and to you that I can be independent, and let's see where our hearts lead us. Owen considered this, then nodded slowly. A wise plan. Though I warn you, Miss Zimmerman, I am not a patient man by nature. Waiting will be a trial. She laughed softly. For me as well, Mr. Norton. But worthwhile things often require patience, don't they? Instead of answering, Owen stood, still holding her hand, and gently drew her to her feet. In the deep blue twilight, his eyes searched hers, seeking permission. Josephine lifted her face to his in silent assent. His kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When she responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, he deepened the kiss, one arm encircling her waist to draw her closer. Josephine felt herself melting into him, all the fears and doubts of the past weeks dissolving in the certainty of his embrace. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day I brought you here, he confessed. I wouldn't have objected, she teased, her heart too full for solemnity. He chuckled, the sound vibrating through her. Noted for future reference. More seriously, he added, whatever happens, Josephine, know that you will always have a home here, whether as a guest, a friend, or I hope someday as my wife. I do know, she said softly. And that knowledge gives me the courage to try my wings, knowing I have a safe place to land. They remained on the porch for another hour, talking quietly of plans and hopes, of practical arrangements and future dreams. When at last they went inside, Mrs. Wilkins took one look at their linked hands and beamed with satisfaction, as if a particularly challenging recipe had turned out exactly as she'd hoped. The remaining weeks before Josephine was due to take up her position in Aspen passed all too quickly. She continued to prepare for her teaching duties, corresponding with Mrs. Peterson about curriculum and materials. Owen helped her select books from his library that might be useful for her students and ordered additional supplies from Denver that arrived by stagecoach. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. They rode together in the mornings, exploring the far reaches of the ranch and picnicking in secluded meadows where wildflowers still bloomed despite the advancing summer. In the evenings, they shared music and conversation, sometimes reading aloud to each other from Owen's collection of books. And there were kisses sweet, tender moments stolen in the barn or the orchard, passionate exchanges on the porch after Mrs. Wilkins had gone to bed. Yet true to their agreement, Owen never pressed for more than Josephine freely offered. He seemed to understand her need to establish her independence before making a lifetime commitment, even as his eyes told her that his heart was already decided. A week before Josephine was to move to Aspen, Owen surprised her by announcing another trip to town. "There are some things I need to take care of," he explained vaguely, "and I thought you might like to see your accommodations before you move in permanently." The journey to town was filled with anticipation. Josephine wondered what awaited her in Aspen, not just the school and her rooms, but the community that would become her home, at least temporarily. Would she find friends there? Would her students respond to her teaching? Would she truly feel independent, or would she spend every moment counting the days until she could return to Aspen Creek Ranch? Their first stop in town was the school building. Mrs. Peterson met them there, key in hand, eager to show Josephine the classroom that had been prepared and the living quarters upstairs. "We've tried to make it comfortable," Mrs. Peterson said, leading the way up a narrow staircase at the back of the building. "It's not luxurious, but it's private and secure." The rooms were simple but adequate: a small sitting room with a stove for heating and cooking, a bedroom just large enough for a narrow bed and a dresser, and a tiny washroom. The furniture was plain but sturdy, the linens clean, the windows letting in ample light. "It's perfect," Josephine said sincerely. "More than I expected." Mrs. Peterson beamed. "I'm so glad you're pleased." Now, about meals, several families have offered to host you regularly, and the cafe provides a discount to the teacher. But Mr. Norton mentioned that you're becoming quite proficient in the kitchen. Josephine glanced at Owen, who was examining the stove with a critical eye. "Mrs. Wilkins has been teaching me," she confirmed. "I can manage simple meals." "Excellent. Independence is important for a young woman in your position." Mrs. Peterson's gaze flicked between Josephine and Owen, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Though I suspect you won't be dining alone too often." After they had toured the classroom, a large, well-lit room with rows of desks, a teacher's table on a raised platform, and a substantial blackboard, Mrs. Peterson excused herself to attend another appointment. "What do you think?" Owen asked when they were alone. "Will it suit you?" Josephine looked around the empty classroom, trying to envision it filled with children. "Yes, I believe it will. It's a new beginning, a chance to make a difference." "You'll be an excellent teacher," Owen said with conviction. "Those children are fortunate to have you." She smiled at his faith in her. "I hope to prove you right." Owen glanced at the pocket watch he carried. "We have one more stop to make if you're not too tired." "Not at all," she assured him. "Where are we going?" "It's a surprise," he said mysteriously, offering his arm. He led her down the main street to a jeweler's shop tucked between the bank and a milliner's. A bell jangled as they entered, and a small, elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from a workbench. "Ah, Mr. Norton. Right on time." The jeweler set aside the piece he had been working on and disappeared into a back room, returning moments later with a small velvet box. "Here it is, sir, just as you requested." Josephine's heart began to race as Owen accepted the box with a word of thanks. He turned to her, his expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Josephine," he began, "I know we agreed to wait to give you time to establish yourself here in Aspen, and I still intend to honor that agreement." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a perfect sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "But I wanted you to have this as a promise, a symbol of my commitment to you whenever you're ready to accept it." Tears welled in Josephine's eyes. "Owen," she whispered, "it's beautiful." "It was my mother's," he said softly. "I had Mr. Finley here resize it for you. I hope that's all right." "It's more than all right," she assured him, deeply touched by the gesture. "It's perfect." "Then may I?" he asked, removing the ring from its box. Josephine extended her left hand, and Owen slipped the ring onto her third finger. It fit perfectly, the sapphire catching the light from the shop window and reflecting it in brilliant blue sparks. "Not an engagement yet," Owen clarified, still holding her hand. "Just a promise. When you're ready, truly ready, I'll ask you properly." "And I already know what my answer will be," Josephine said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "But I appreciate your patience, your respect for my need to stand on my own first." The jeweler, who had tactfully busied himself at his workbench during this exchange, now looked up with a smile. "If I may say so, miss, that ring has never looked better than it does on your hand. Mrs. Norton would have been pleased." "Thank you," Josephine said, feeling a connection to the woman she would never meet but whose son had captured her heart. "I'll treasure it always." They left the shop hand in hand, the ring a comfortable weight on Josephine's finger and a visible symbol of the promise between them. The afternoon sun gilded the town, transforming the ordinary buildings into something almost magical. Or perhaps, Josephine thought, it was her own happiness that cast such a golden light on everything she saw. "Shall we have dinner at the hotel before heading back to the ranch?" Owen suggested. "They've hired a new chef from St. Louis who's supposed to be quite good." "I'd like that," Josephine agreed. "It will be a celebration of sorts, of new beginnings and promises kept." The hotel dining room was elegant by frontier standards, with linen tablecloths, silver cutlery, and a pianist playing softly in one corner. Owen and Josephine were seated at a table near a window overlooking the main street, where the activities of the town continued as evening approached. Over a meal that lived up to its reputation, they talked of the future Josephine's plans for her students, Owen's ideas for expanding the ranch, the life they might build together when the time was right. It was a conversation filled with hope and possibility, tempered by practical considerations but never limited by them. As coffee was served, Josephine happened to glance out the window. A stagecoach had pulled up in front of the hotel, and passengers were disembarking, dusty and tired from their journey. Among them was a man whose appearance caused Josephine to gasp and clutch at Owen's hand across the table. "What is it?" Owen asked, alarmed by her sudden pallor. "That man," she whispered, nodding toward the window. "The tall one in the dark suit, that's my uncle, Gerald Zimmerman." Owen turned to look, his expression hardening as he observed the man who had so callously sold his own niece to slave traders. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely." Josephine's hand trembled in his. "What is he doing here? How could he have found me?" "I doubt he has," Owen said, his mind working quickly. "Aspen is becoming known for its silver mines. He's probably here on business." His eyes narrowed as he watched the man enter the hotel. "This might be an opportunity, Josephine. A chance to see justice done." Josephine's first instinct was to flee, to escape back to the ranch before her uncle could discover her presence. But as Owen's words sank in, she felt a different emotion rising within her, righteous anger replacing fear. "You're right," she said, straightening in her chair. "He shouldn't be allowed to get away with what he did to me or what he might do to others." Owen squeezed her hand. "Are you sure? Confronting him won't be easy, I'm sure." Josephine's voice strengthened with resolve. "I won't let him intimidate me any longer." They watched as Gerald Zimmerman checked in at the front desk, then headed toward the hotel bar rather than up to a room. Owen signaled for their bill, paid it quickly, and offered Josephine his arm. "Let's go have a word with your uncle," he said grimly. The hotel bar was dimly lit and half full, mostly with men unwinding after a day's work. Gerald Zimmerman sat alone at a corner table, a glass of whiskey before him, his attention on some papers he had spread out. Josephine hesitated at the entrance, momentarily overcome by memories of her uncle's cruelty after her father's death, the cold dismissal of her grief, the confiscation of her possessions, the arrangements made behind her back to send her west under false pretenses. Owen sensed her hesitation and placed a supportive hand at the small of her back. "I'm right here," he murmured. "You don't have to do this alone." Drawing strength from his presence, Josephine straightened her spine and walked toward her uncle's table, Owen beside her. Gerald didn't look up until they were standing directly before him, casting a shadow across his papers. "Excuse me," he began irritably. "I'm rather busy." The words died in his throat as he recognized his niece. His face, already florid from the whiskey, turned a deeper shade of red. "Josephine." "What the devil?" "Hello, Uncle Gerald," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "You seem surprised to see me. Did you expect me to be dead by now? Or perhaps sold to a brothel or a mine?" Gerald's eyes darted around the bar, clearly concerned about being overheard. "I don't know what nonsense you're talking about, girl. I arranged a respectable position for you with associates in the West." "You sold me," Josephine stated flatly, "to men who auctioned women like cattle. Did you think I wouldn't know? That I wouldn't remember your face when you put me on that stagecoach, knowing exactly what awaited me?" Gerald's expression hardened. "You always were an ungrateful, hysterical girl. Your father spoiled you, filled your head with ridiculous notions about women's capabilities. I did what was necessary to ensure you were provided for." "Provided for?" Owen's voice was dangerously quiet. "Is that what you call being bound and displayed on an auction block? Being sold to the highest bidder without regard for your safety or dignity?" Gerald's gaze shifted to Owen, noticing him properly for the first time. "And who might you be, sir? This is a family matter that doesn't concern you." "I'm the man who bought your niece's freedom," Owen replied coldly. "And I'm also the man who's going to make sure you answer for your crimes." A flicker of fear crossed Gerald's face before he masked it with bravado. "Crimes? Don't be absurd. Everything was perfectly legal. I had guardianship." "Guardianship doesn't give you the right to sell another human being," Josephine interrupted. "Slavery is illegal in this country, Uncle Gerald. Has been for 10 years now." "It wasn't slavery," Gerald protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "It was an arrangement, a contract for services. Save your excuses for the judge," Owen said, his hand moving to rest near his gun in a subtle but unmistakable warning. "The federal marshal has been building a case against the auction ring in Silver Creek for months. Your name has just become a valuable addition to his evidence." Gerald's face paled. "You're bluffing. You have no proof of anything." "I have my testimony," Josephine said firmly, "and I have this." She reached into her reticule and withdrew a folded paper, the original letter her uncle had given her. Supposedly an introduction to a respectable family friend, but actually instructions to the men who had taken her to Silver Creek. She had kept it all this time, a reminder of her uncle's betrayal. Gerald stared at the letter, recognition and fear dawning in his eyes. "Josephine, be reasonable," he said, his tone suddenly placating. "I'm your only family. Surely we can come to some arrangement that benefits us both." "The only arrangement I'm interested in is seeing you face justice," Josephine replied, her voice steady despite the emotions roiling within her. "Not just for me, but for any others you might have sold or planned to sell." Gerald's demeanor changed instantly, his face contorting with anger. "You ungrateful little—" He lunged across the table, reaching for the letter. Owen moved with the speed and precision of a man accustomed to danger, catching Gerald's wrist in a grip that made the older man gasp with pain. "That would be a mistake, Mr. Zimmerman," Owen said softly. A very serious mistake. The commotion had drawn attention. The bartender approached cautiously. Everything all right here? No, it isn't, Owen replied without releasing Gerald. This man is wanted for human trafficking. Would you send someone to fetch Sheriff Harlow? Tell him Owen Norton needs his assistance. The bartender nodded and dispatched a boy who had been sweeping the floor. Gerald, realizing the seriousness of his situation, ceased struggling against Owen's grip. "This is a misunderstanding," he said desperately. "My niece is confused, emotional. Save it," Owen advised. "Sheriff Harlow has been working with the federal marshal on stopping the auction rings. He'll be very interested in what Josephine has to say, and in that letter." They waited in tense silence until Sheriff Harlow arrived, a tall, lean man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much of human depravity to be easily shocked. After hearing Josephine's account and examining the letter, he placed Gerald under arrest. "I'll hold him for the marshal," Harlow told Owen and Josephine. "He's due in Aspen next week. In the meantime, Miss Zimmerman, I'll need a formal statement from you." "Of course," Josephine agreed, feeling oddly calm now that the confrontation was over. "I'll come to your office tomorrow morning." As the sheriff led Gerald away, the older man turned back, his face twisted with malice. "This isn't over, Josephine," he spat. "You'll regret this. I promise you that." "The only regret I have," Josephine replied steadily, "is that I didn't see you for what you are years ago." "Goodbye, Uncle Gerald." When they were alone again, Josephine's composure finally cracked. She trembled violently, and Owen guided her to a chair, signaling the bartender for a glass of water. "You were magnificent," he told her, his voice filled with admiration. "Absolutely magnificent." "I was terrified," she admitted, sipping the water gratefully. "But also relieved in a way, to face him, to stand up to him, to know that he can't hurt me or anyone else anymore." Owen covered her hand with his thumb brushing over the promise ring that now seemed even more significant after this confrontation with her past. "That's courage, Josephine. Not the absence of fear, but the determination to do what's right despite it." They sat quietly for a few minutes, Josephine gathering her strength after the emotional encounter. Finally, she said, "I think I'd like to go back to the ranch now, if you don't mind." "Of course," Owen agreed, helping her to her feet. "We can return tomorrow for your meeting with the sheriff." The ride back to Aspen Creek was peaceful, the summer evening cool and fragrant with pine. Josephine felt drained but also lighter, as if a burden she had been carrying had finally been set down. Her uncle's evil had been exposed, justice set in motion. It wouldn't erase what had happened, but it was a step toward healing. At the ranch, Mrs. Wilkins took one look at Josephine's face and immediately bustled about preparing a hot bath and a soothing tea. "Whatever happened in town has worn you to the bone, my dear," the housekeeper observed. "You need rest and comfort." While Mrs. Wilkins tended to Josephine, Owen briefly explained the situation to Hank, who had been managing the ranch in their absence. The older man's weathered face darkened with anger as he heard of Gerald Zimmerman's crimes. "Some men don't deserve the name," Hank muttered. "Selling his own kin makes my blood boil." Later, after Josephine had bathed and changed into a comfortable dress, she joined Owen on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vault of the sky. They sat side by side in the rocking chairs that had become their customary evening spot. "How are you feeling?" Owen asked gently. "Better," Josephine said, surprised to find it was true. "Confronting him was difficult but necessary. I feel freer somehow." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "Facing our fears often has that effect. It strips them of their power over us." "Yes, exactly." She turned toward him, her expression earnest in the soft light from the windows. "Thank you, Owen, for being there with me, for supporting me without taking over." "You didn't need me to take over," he said simply. "You had the courage to handle it yourself. I was just there to ensure your safety." Josephine considered this. It was true she had confronted her uncle on her own terms, found her own voice. Owen's presence had given her confidence, but the strength had come from within herself. "I think," she said slowly, "that today helped me see something important about myself and about us." "What's that?" Owen asked, his eyes intent on her face. "I've been concerned about establishing my independence before committing to a future with you. I wanted to prove to myself that I could stand on my own." She touched the sapphire ring that glinted in the starlight. "But I realize now that true independence isn't about doing everything alone. It's about having the freedom to choose your path, your principles, your companions." She met his gaze steadily. "And I choose you, Owen, not because I need you, but because I want you beside me, because together we're stronger than either of us would be alone." Joy spread across Owen's face, warming his eyes and softening the lines around his mouth. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that I don't need to wait until I've taught for a term or established myself in Aspen. I know my own mind and heart." She took a deep breath. "If you're still willing to ask the question properly, I'm ready to give my answer." Owen rose from his chair and knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. The gesture was so unexpected, so formal yet heartfelt, that tears sprang to Josephine's eyes. "Josephine Zimmerman," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "From the moment I saw you on that auction block, something in me recognized something in you, a spirit, a strength, a quality of soul that called to mine. Every day since then has only deepened my admiration, my respect, and my love for you." He paused, his thumbs stroking the backs of her hands. "I know our beginning was unusual, but I believe with all my heart that we were meant to find each other. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Josephine whispered, her vision blurring with tears of happiness. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." He rose and pulled her gently to her feet, enfolding her in an embrace that felt like coming home after a long journey. When he kissed her, it was with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and a future full of possibility. The screen door creaked, and they broke apart to find Mrs. Wilkins standing in the doorway, a suspicious moisture in her eyes. "I was just coming to see if you wanted coffee," she said, making a poor attempt at nonchalance. "But I see you're otherwise occupied." Owen laughed, his arm still around Josephine's waist. "Mrs. Wilkins, I have an announcement. Miss Zimmerman has done me the great honor of agreeing to become my wife." The housekeeper beamed. "Well, it's about time. I was beginning to think I'd need to lock you two in the root cellar to get this settled." She bustled forward to embrace Josephine. "Welcome to the family, my dear." "Officially, that is." "Thank you," Josephine said, returning the hug. "Your blessing means a great deal to me." "Blessing. PFFT." Mrs. Wilkins waved a hand dismissively. "What you need is a celebration. I'm thinking a special dinner tomorrow night, and we should invite Dr. and Mrs. Peterson from town. They'll be delighted. And perhaps Reverend Thompson could join us. Might as well discuss the wedding details while we're at it." Owen and Josephine exchanged amused glances as Mrs. Wilkins continued to plan, her organizational skills immediately directed toward their upcoming nuptials. When she finally retreated to the kitchen, still muttering about menu options and suitable dates, they collapsed into their chairs, laughing. "I hope you know what you've done," Owen said, taking Josephine's hand. "She'll have the entire wedding planned by breakfast." "I don't mind," Josephine replied, her heart too full of happiness to be concerned about such details. though I was thinking perhaps a small ceremony, just family and close friends." "Whatever you want," Owen assured her. "Big or small, elaborate or simple, as long as at the end of it you're my wife." They sat together as the night deepened around them, discussing their future, where they would live, the ranch, with frequent visits to Aspen for Josephine's teaching, when they would marry, soon, but not so hastily as to appear improper, how they would balance their individual pursuits with their shared life. "I still want to teach," Josephine said, "at least for this term. I've made a commitment to the town and I want to honor it." "Of course," Owen agreed. "I wouldn't have it any other way. The ranch is only an hour's ride from town. You could stay there during the week and return home on weekends. Or I could come to you. We'll make it work." Home. The word resonated in Josephine's heart. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, she had found not just shelter but a true home with a man who respected her independence even as he offered her his heart. The following morning, Josephine returned to Aspen with Owen to give her statement to Sheriff Harlow. The process was straightforward but emotionally draining, requiring her to recount in detail the circumstances of her uncle's betrayal and her subsequent sale at auction. Owen remained by her side throughout, a silent source of strength. Gerald Zimmerman, confined to a cell in the sheriff's office, refused to look at his niece or acknowledge her presence. His arrogance had given way to a sullen resignation as the reality of his situation became clear. The federal marshal would arrive within the week, and the evidence against him, Josephine's testimony and the damning letter, was irrefutable. "He'll face serious charges," Sheriff Harlow told them as they prepared to leave. "Trafficking in human beings carries heavy penalties these days. And we'll be investigating whether there were others involved back east, perhaps associates who helped identify vulnerable women for the trade." "Thank you, Sheriff," Josephine said sincerely. "Not just for me, but for anyone else who might have suffered a similar fate." As they left the sheriff's office, Josephine felt a sense of closure. Her uncle would face justice, and while nothing could undo what she had endured, she had emerged from the ordeal stronger and with a future brighter than she could have imagined. Their next stop was the school, where they met with Mrs. Peterson to explain the change in circumstances. The committee chair was initially concerned about losing her newly appointed teacher, but quickly warmed to the compromise solution of Josephine teaching during the week and returning to the ranch on weekends. "And of course, once you're married, Mr. Norton is welcome to stay in your quarters when he visits," Mrs. Peterson added with a knowing smile. "We're not so provincial as to object to a husband visiting his wife." News of their engagement spread quickly through Aspen. By the time they stopped for lunch at the cafe, they were receiving congratulations from people Josephine had never met, evidence of Owen's standing in the community and the town's close-knit nature. "Is it always like this?" Josephine asked as yet another well-wisher stopped by their table. "Everyone knowing everyone else's business," Owen chuckled. "Pretty much. It has its drawbacks, but also its advantages. People look out for each other here. When there's trouble, a fire, an accident, illness, the whole town rallies around." "I like that," Josephine decided. "It's different from Boston, where we barely knew our neighbors despite living just feet away from them." Their final errand in town was a visit to Reverend Thompson to discuss their wedding. The minister, a kindly man in his 50s with an air of practical spirituality, was delighted to officiate. "I've known Owen since he first came to these parts," he told Josephine. "Watched him build that ranch from nothing but determination and hard work. He's a good man and he deserves happiness." His eyes twinkled. "And from what I can see, Miss Zimmerman, so do you." They settled on a date 3 weeks, hence enough time to make proper arrangements, but not so long that propriety would be strained by their obvious eagerness. The ceremony would be held at the ranch, followed by a celebration for friends and neighbors. As they rode back to Aspen Creek in the golden light of late afternoon, Josephine found herself filled with a deep contentment. The future stretched before her, not without challenges but rich with promise. She would teach, fulfilling her desire for meaningful work. She would marry Owen, building a partnership based on mutual respect and love. And perhaps, in time, there would be children, sons and daughters who would grow up in the freedom and beauty of this wild, magnificent landscape. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About the future," she replied honestly. "Our future. How different it is from anything I might have imagined a month ago, and how much more wonderful." Owen reached across the space between their horses to take her hand briefly. "I think about that too. How a moment of impulse deciding to attend that auction changed everything. If I had ridden past Silver Creek that day." "But you didn't," Josephine said firmly. "You were there, just when I needed you most. Some might call it coincidence, but I prefer to think it was something more." "Fate or providence, or both," Owen suggested. "Maybe we make our own fate through the choices we make, but something larger guides us toward those choices in the first place." This philosophical side of Owen continued to surprise and delight Josephine. He was a man of action, certainly, but also of thought, a rare combination that she treasured. The 3 weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparations. Mrs. Wilkins orchestrated everything with military precision, from the menu for the celebration to the arrangement of flowers to the cleaning and organizing of the ranch house. Josephine found herself swept along in the tide of activity, simultaneously planning for her wedding and for her first term as a teacher. She visited Aspen several times to prepare her classroom, arrange her living quarters, and meet with parents of prospective students. During one such visit, she received an unexpected letter forwarded from Boston, a communication from her father's lawyer informing her that, in light of Gerald Zimmerman's arrest, her inheritance was being reviewed. There was a strong possibility that assets her uncle had claimed as his own would be restored to her. "It's not about the money," she told Owen that evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "It's about justice. About honoring my father's intentions." "I understand," Owen said. "Though I should warn you that if you become a wealthy woman, Mrs. Wilkins will expect you to renovate the east wing of the house. She's been campaigning for new curtains and carpets for years." Josephine laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "I think that could be arranged, and perhaps a piano for the parlor, a proper grand piano, not just an upright." "Careful," Owen cautioned with mock seriousness. "A man could get used to such luxury. Next thing you know, I'll be wearing tailored suits and refusing to mend fences." "Never," Josephine declared, straightening his collar with affectionate precision. "You, Owen Norton, will always be a rancher at heart. That's part of what I love about you." The day before the wedding, guests began to arrive from more distant locations. Owen's former commanding officer from his cavalry days, now a successful banker in Denver. A cousin from Pennsylvania who had been like a brother to him growing up. And most surprisingly, a slender woman with dark hair and familiar blue eyes who descended from the afternoon stage with tentative steps. "Olivia," Owen's voice broke as he stared at the woman, disbelief warring with desperate hope on his face. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Owen, my brother, I found you at last." They collided in an embrace so fierce it seemed they might never let go. Years of separation and uncertainty dissolving in the miracle of reunion. Josephine stood apart, her own eyes wet with tears of joy for the man she loved. When they finally separated, Owen, his face transformed by happiness, drew Josephine forward. "Olivia, this is Josephine Zimmerman, my fiancée. We're to be married tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Olivia exclaimed, wiping her eyes. "Oh, I've arrived just in time then. How did you find me?" Owen asked, still holding his sister's hands as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "I searched for years." "It's a long story," Olivia said. "One I'll tell you properly when we have time, but the short version is that I ended up in San Francisco after everything. I saw your name in a newspaper article about cattle ranching in Colorado. It mentioned Aspen Creek Ranch and your history as a Union cavalry officer." She shook her head in wonder. "I couldn't believe it, after all this time, to find you by chance." "Not chance," Owen said firmly. "Providence, as Josephine would say." That evening, after a joyful dinner during which Olivia began to share her story, the hardships she had endured, her escape from captivity, the kind family who had taken her in, her eventual journey to California, she and Josephine found themselves alone on the porch while Owen discussed something with Hank. "Thank you," Olivia said simply. "For what?" Josephine asked, puzzled. "For loving my brother, for bringing happiness back into his life." Olivia's eyes, so like Owen's, were serious in the fading light. "I can see the way he looks at you, like you're a miracle he never expected to find." Josephine felt a blush warm her cheeks. "That's how I feel about him too." Olivia smiled. "Then you'll understand why I'm so grateful. Owen was always the responsible one, the protector. Even before our parents died, he carried the weight of everyone's welfare on his shoulders. I worried that he would never allow himself joy, that he would spend his life trying to atone for not being able to protect me." "He never stopped looking for you," Josephine said softly. "Never stopped hoping." "I know," Olivia replied, her voice thick with emotion. "That's who he is. Loyal to the bone." She reached out and squeezed Josephine's hand. "But now he has you too. Someone to share his burdens, to remind him that life is meant to be lived, not just endured." Later that night, as Josephine prepared for bed, she reflected on Olivia's words. They encapsulated exactly what she hoped to be for Owen, not just a wife, but a true partner. Someone who would stand beside him in all things, who would help him find joy in the everyday moments of life, who would love him with the same unwavering loyalty he showed to those under his care. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the September sky an impossible blue that seemed to promise endless possibilities. Mrs. Wilkins and Olivia helped Josephine dress in a gown of ivory satin that had been hastily but expertly altered from one borrowed from the dressmaker in Aspen. Her hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, adorned with sprigs of wild aster and aspen leaves beginning to turn golden with the approach of autumn. "You look beautiful," Olivia said, adjusting the small wreath of flowers. "Like a princess in one of the fairy tales our mother used to read to us." "Owen won't know what hit him," Mrs. Wilkins agreed, uncharacteristically emotional as she stepped back to survey their handiwork. "Now, I'd better go check on the preparations. The guests will be arriving soon." Left alone for a moment, Josephine stood before the small mirror in her room, hardly recognizing the radiant woman who gazed back at her. So much had changed since that terrible day in Silver Creek. She had been reborn, in a way not as a victim but as a survivor, stronger for having endured, wiser for having seen both the darkness and the light in human hearts. A knock at the door interrupted her reflections. It was Hank, looking uncomfortable but dignified in a freshly pressed suit, his gray hair slicked down with water. "Begging your pardon, Miss Zimmerman," he said, hat in hand, "but I was wondering. That is, Owen asked me if I would. Well, seeing as your father isn't here." He took a deep breath and started again. "Would you allow me the honor of giving you away?" Josephine's heart filled with warmth at the request. Hank had been kind to her from the beginning, a gruff but gentle presence at the ranch, his loyalty to Owen absolute and his approval of their relationship obvious. "I would be proud to have you escort me, Hank," she said sincerely. "Thank you." Relief and pleasure spread across the old cowboy's weathered face. "Well then," he said, offering his arm with formal correctness, "whenever you're ready, Miss Zimmerman. Though I should say, for the last time, since you won't be Miss Zimmerman much longer." Josephine took his arm, steadied by his solid presence. "I'm ready." The ceremony was held in the meadow near the house, where wildflowers still bloomed among the grasses turning golden with the season. Guests had gathered in a semicircle, friends from the ranch and from Aspen, Dr. and Mrs. Peterson, the blacksmith who had crafted special horseshoes for the occasion, the storekeeper who had closed his shop for the day to attend, and many others whose lives had intersected with Owen's over the years. At the center of the semicircle stood Owen, tall and handsome in a new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face solemn with the significance of the moment. Beside him stood Reverend Thompson, Bible in hand, and on his other side Olivia, beaming with happiness for her brother. As Josephine approached on Hank's arm, a hush fell over the gathering. She saw only Owen, his eyes finding hers across the distance, their blue depths filled with such love that she felt it like a physical force drawing her forward. The ceremony itself was simple but profound. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of love, respect, and partnership that acknowledged their unusual beginning, but looked toward a future built on the solid foundation of shared values and deep affection. When Owen slipped a gold band onto her finger to join the sapphire ring that already resided there, his hands were steady, but his voice roughened with emotion. "With this ring, I thee wed," he said, the traditional words carrying the weight of his commitment. "All that I am and all that I have, I share with you, Josephine, from this day forward until death parts us." Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, and Owen kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, a kiss that was both a culmination and a beginning, sealing their promises before family and friends. The celebration that followed was joyous and relaxed, with tables set up under the aspens, laden with food prepared by Mrs. Wilkins and several women from town. There was music, a fiddler from Aspen who played lively tunes that had everyone clapping along, and later, at Owen's insistence, Josephine at the piano, playing the songs that had become part of their courtship. As the afternoon mellowed into evening, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Josephine, momentarily separated from Owen as he spoke with his former commanding officer, found herself approached by one of the ranch hands she knew only slightly, a quiet man named Miguel who rarely joined in group activities. "Mrs. Norton," he said, the new name still strange but wonderful to her ears, "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Josephine asked, puzzled. "What for?" Miguel glanced toward Owen, then back to Josephine. "For making him happy. The boss, he saved my sister from an auction in New Mexico 2 years ago. Got her to safety, helped her start a new life. He's a good man, the best I know. He deserves happiness." Before Josephine could respond, Miguel had melted back into the crowd, leaving her with a deeper appreciation of the man she had married and the impact he had had on so many lives. Looking across the gathering, she found Owen's eyes already on her, his expression softening as their gazes met. He excused himself from his conversation and came to her side. "What are you thinking, Mrs. Norton?" he asked, taking her hand. "You have that contemplative look I've come to know so well." "I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest woman in Colorado," she replied honestly, "and that I have so much to learn about my husband still." Owen smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "We have a lifetime for that learning," he reminded her. "And I suspect there are a few things about my wife that I have yet to discover as well." As darkness fell, the celebration began to wind down. Guests from town departed first, with warm congratulations and promises to see Josephine when she began teaching the following week. Those staying at the ranch, Owen's cousin, his former commander, and a few others who had traveled far retired to the bunkhouse, or the guest rooms Mrs. Wilkins had prepared. Finally, it was just Owen and Josephine, standing on the porch of what was now their home in every sense. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky in breathtaking profusion, the air cool with the first hint of autumn. "Happy?" Owen asked softly, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she assured him, leaning against his strength. "Though I can hardly believe it's real that I'm here, that we're married, that your sister has returned. It seems like a dream." "If it is, I hope we never wake up," Owen said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But I think it's real enough. This happiness, this life we're building together." He turned her gently in his arms to face him. "I love you, Josephine Norton." "And I love you, Owen Norton," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to meet his kiss. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." They stood together in the starlight, two people who had found in each other not just love but understanding, not just passion but partnership, not just comfort but challenge. The path that had brought them together had been difficult, even dangerous, but standing now at its culmination, Josephine knew she would not change a single step. For she had been sold like a mare, but a cowboy had said, "You're no one's property." And in that moment of recognition and respect, the seeds of a love had been planted that would grow strong and true in the wild and beautiful land they now shared. 5 years later, Josephine stood on the porch of Aspen Creek Ranch, watching as her husband and their 3-year-old son, Thomas, rode slowly around the corral on Owen's gentle old stallion. Thomas, a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin, squealed with delight as Owen pointed out a hawk circling high overhead. "Mama, look," Thomas called, waving excitedly. "Eagle, hawk," Owen corrected gently. "Eagles are bigger, remember." "We saw one last week by the high meadow." "Hawk," Thomas repeated, nodding seriously. "Big bird." Josephine waved back, her heart full at the sight of them together. In her arms, 6-month-old Elizabeth slept peacefully, unperturbed by her brother's enthusiasm. The baby had her mother's fair coloring, but promised to have her father's thoughtful temperament, calm and observant even at this young age. The ranch had prospered in the years since their marriage, expanding both in acreage and in reputation. Owen's careful breeding program had produced cattle that thrived in the challenging mountain environment, and his fair dealings had earned him the respect of buyers throughout the territory. Josephine had taught for 2 years at the Aspen School, dividing her time between town and ranch, until Thomas's birth made the arrangement too difficult to maintain. She had reluctantly resigned her position, but had found new purpose in establishing a smaller school at the ranch for the children of the hands and neighboring homesteaders. Twice a week, she taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to 8 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. It was challenging work, but deeply satisfying. Olivia had settled in Aspen, where she ran a successful dressmaking shop. She visited the ranch often and was a favorite aunt to Thomas and Elizabeth. The shadows of her difficult past still lingered, but surrounded by family and purpose, she had found healing and joy. As for Gerald Zimmerman, he had been convicted of human trafficking and sentenced to 15 years in a federal prison. The assets he had misappropriated from Josephine's inheritance had been restored to her, providing a financial cushion that allowed them to expand the ranch and establish a fund for the education of their children. "What's that smile for?" Owen asked, bringing the horse alongside the porch, Thomas still perched proudly before him. "Just counting my blessings," Josephine replied, "which are numerous and increasing all the time." "Can I get down now, Papa?" Thomas asked, wiggling impatiently. "I want to show Mama the frog I found." Owen chuckled. "Whoa there, Cowboy, let me help you." He swung down from the saddle, then lifted Thomas carefully to the ground. The boy immediately scampered up the porch steps to his mother. "Mama, I found a frog by the creek. It was this big." He held his hands about a foot apart, his eyes wide with the importance of his discovery. "That's a very large frog," Josephine said with appropriate amazement. "Perhaps after your nap you can show me where you found it." "No nap," Thomas protested, though his statement was undermined by a massive yawn. "I'm not tired." "Of course not," Josephine agreed solemnly. "But frogs are most active after resting, you know. If you rest too, you'll be ready to find him again when he wakes up." This logic, peculiar though it was, satisfied Thomas. He allowed himself to be led inside by Mrs. Wilkins, who had appeared at the door with perfect timing, as she often did. "That woman has a sixth sense about when she's needed," Owen observed, coming up the steps to join Josephine. He peered at Elizabeth's sleeping face and gently stroked her downy head. "How's our little princess?" "Perfect," Josephine replied. "She ate well and has been sleeping for nearly 2 hours. I expect her to wake hungry any moment now." As if on cue, Elizabeth stirred, her tiny face scrunching up as she transitioned from sleep to wakefulness. Owen took her from Josephine's arms with practiced ease, cradling her against his shoulder where she settled contentedly, blinking at the bright world around her. "Hello there, Libby," he murmured, using the nickname that had naturally evolved. "Did you have good dreams?" Josephine watched them, her heart so full it seemed it might overflow. This man, who had once seemed so formidable, was putty in the hands of his infant daughter. The tenderness with which he held her, the softness in his voice when he spoke to her, revealed a depth of love that never failed to move Josephine. "The Petersons are coming for dinner tomorrow," she reminded him, moving to stand beside them at the porch railing. "And Reverend Thompson. Mrs. Wilkins is already planning the menu." Owen nodded, still focused on Elizabeth, who had grasped his finger with her tiny hand. "I'll make sure to be back from checking the north pasture in plenty of time," he promised. "The fence needed mending last week, and I want to see if the repairs have held." "Take Hank with you," Josephine suggested. "He's been restless lately, feeling his age, I think. The ride would do him good, and he values being needed." Owen looked at her with appreciation. "You're right, I'll ask him in the morning." He kissed her forehead. "You always see things I miss, especially about people." "That's why we make such a good team," Josephine said, leaning against him as they gazed out at the land that had become her home. "We see different parts of the same whole." The afternoon sun bathed the valley in golden light, illuminating the aspens that gave the ranch its name. In a few weeks, their leaves would turn completely, painting the hillsides in shades of gold that never ceased to take Josephine's breath away. Each year, the cycle of seasons reminded her of life's continuity, of growth and change and renewal. Elizabeth began to fuss, making the small sounds that signaled hunger. Owen handed her back to Josephine, who settled into the porch rocker to nurse the baby. He remained standing, leaning against the railing, his gaze moving from his wife and daughter to the land beyond, his expression one of profound contentment. "You ever think about it?" Josephine asked after a while. "That day in Silver Creek." Owen was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not the auction itself so much as the moment I first saw you. There was something about your eyes' defiance despite everything, dignity, even in that terrible situation." He turned to look at her, his gaze warm with admiration. I think I began falling in love with you right then, though I didn't recognize it as such. I was terrified, Josephine remembered, but when you stepped forward when you said I wasn't property, I felt hope for the first time in weeks. I had no idea where it would lead, Owen said softly. That one moment of intervention, I certainly never imagined all this. He gestured to encompass their home, their children, the life they had built together. Nor did I, Josephine agreed, but I'm grateful every day for the path that brought us here, difficult though parts of it were. They fell silent, content in each other's presence and in the peace of the moment. Elizabeth nursed drowsily, her eyes beginning to close again. Thomas was presumably napping under Mrs. Wilkins' watchful eye. The ranch hands were at their afternoon tasks. All was well in their world. Later, as the sun began to set, they would gather for dinner, a family forged not by blood alone but by choice, by love, by the daily decision to face life's challenges together. They would share the day's stories, plan for tomorrow, and then, when the children were asleep, they would retreat to their room where they would reaffirm the connection that had grown only stronger with the passage of time. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the ranch was silent except for the occasional call of a night bird or the distant howl of a coyote, Josephine would lie awake sometimes, listening to Owen's steady breathing beside her and marveling at the journey that had brought her to this place of belonging. From that auction block in Silver Creek to this peaceful valley, from a woman with no control over her fate to a wife, mother, and teacher, respected in her community, it was a transformation that still amazed her. And at the center of it all was the man who had recognized her humanity when others saw only property, who had offered her freedom with no conditions, who had loved her for her strength rather than despite it. "You're no one's property," he had said that day, 5 years ago. And in those words had been the seed of everything that followed: dignity restored, independence honored, love offered freely rather than demanded. It was the foundation of their marriage and of the family they were building. It was the legacy they would pass to their children. And it was the truth that Josephine carried in her heart, a certainty as strong as the mountains that surrounded their home. She belonged to no one but herself, and that self she gave freely, joyfully, to the man who had understood from the beginning that love without freedom is no love at all.